Yo, what's up, everybody? It's International Master Daniel Rensch. We're back again today on Chess.com's YouTube channel. Hope you enjoy this weekend feature. I wanted to bring you the next most logical installment in our chess openings playlist after the Nimzo Indian, that being the Queen's Indian. Why is the Queen's Indian the next most logical installment after the Nimzo Indian? Well, after d4, knight f6, c4, e6, the main move, as you learned from our video a few days back this week, the Nimzo Indian, after knight to c3 is bishop to b4. Of course, a move such as d5 would transpose back into a Queen's Gambit or Queen's Gambit decline, but that's not really the subject. You can find videos on the Queen's Gambit and Queen's Gambit decline in our chess openings playlist, in fact, but that's not our subject. So a transposition is possible, but if white doesn't allow the Nimzo Indian with this move, knight to c3, the other main option for white is to play this move knight to f3. And in this position, there are several ways for black to play. We're not covering all of them right now, but to mention them, there's the move c5. After d5, black has options of capturing and transposing into a Benoni opening, a Benoni structure. There's also the options of b5, which is the Bloomenfeld Gambit. Maybe not considered a mainline option about 20 years ago, but certainly is now a very popular way for black to play. And the other way for black to play, rather than c5, would be the move bishop to b4 check. And after several moves possible here for white, bishop to d2, knight b to d2, knight to c3 would transpose back into a Nimzo Indian. But after those few moves, knight b d2 or bishop d2, we have a move such as queen to e7, which is the Bogo Indian or the Old Indian, depending on what you want to call it. Those tend to transpose with each other. Again, those are not the subject of today's video, but rather the Queen's Indian. Kind of funny how we have so many names, right? The King's Indian and Queen's Indian were not slave trades in Europe, okay, despite what you may be thinking. Totally joking about that, offensive joke I heard one time from somebody else, so I'm doing the world a favor to pass it on here. But let's get back to the chess. In any case, they are mainline openings, and b6 is an opening, is a way for black to approach white's neglect of bringing this knight to c3. Why does b6 make sense? Because by freeing up this square for the bishop to come to b7, or in some cases a6, what black is doing is potentially preparing to grab control over the light squares in the center. For example, after the move g3, which is the main move for white, black has two main moves, bishop to b7 and bishop to a6. One main line that goes bishop to b7, bishop to g2, bishop to e7. Notice how the main point of white is that he's neglecting developing this bishop here, again, to avoid the natural pin by the bishop, which would lead to Nimzo Indian positions. What he's doing, what he's giving to black in exchange for that is potentially better control over the central light squares. And after the move castles, now white might play the move knight to c3, as black has already lost the tempo with this move, bishop to e7. And there are several ways for black to play, but one of them is the move knight to e4, which is a natural way to play. And black might follow that up with a move like f5, increasing his control over this e4 square, preparing potentially to play a move like d6, knight b d7, and knight f6 to bring another knight behind to support the center. Black can also play the move d5 here at some point. Another way that would support his knight in the center, though it does block the bishop temporarily. The tension that exists between these two fianchettoed bishops, one being on the king's side, one being on the queen's side, is definitely something that defines the Queen's Indian, as potentially white will try to play at sometimes moves like d5, with the idea being that, for example, if we make a move here, random move for black, a move like d5, increases white's control over the center and prepares a move e4 to really maintain a grip. And after black takes it, there's moves such as knight h4, unleashing a pin along the diagonal and preparing to recapture the pawn upon the next move. These are a common pawn break in the center, a common type of tactical tension that exists in the Queen's Indian. The main idea here for black, besides bishop to b7, the other main idea is this move bishop to a6. In this case, what black is doing is trying to put pressure along the diagonal that white is sort of neglecting and leaving behind with this idea of fianchettoing a bishop. After the move bishop a6, there's a few ways for white to play. One of the main ways for white to play is this move queen to c2 that defends the pawn, after which black will typically play this move bishop to b4 check. There are others, but this is the most natural. This move makes sense now because the move knight to c3 would be not necessarily a transposition in the Nimzo, but rather potentially just a loss of the pawn, as developing the knight here blocks the queen's protection of the c4 pawn. And the move bishop to d2, which is another natural move here, would be met by bishop d7. You might think, why would black waste a tempo like this? But a typical idea is that the bishop on d2 sort of fights this knight for the square, in the sense that white's pieces are fighting each other over the right squares. Doesn't want to develop the knight here, as black might capture it. Developing the knight to c3 blocks the queen and therefore unprotects the c4 pawn. And if he can't develop the knight to c3 or a3, then at some point white will also have to lose a tempo with this bishop in order to free the square for the knight. So this move bishop d7, after the move e4, which is a natural way for white to play and try to grab the center and punish black's loss of time. d5 captures here, bishop takes f1, ruining white's right to castle, but white's okay, he's going to castle by hand. You might see a line like this occur, in which case the natural play tends to occur with white fighting for the c-file. Black has a pretty good grip on the light squares, and white has to catch up in terms of time as his king is castling by hand. It's a pretty dynamic and interesting game, and you can check it out. If you want to know more about the variations here, you can use our database search in Master Games Explorer on our main site, on the main site of Chess.com. But this would be an introduction to one of the main lines of the Queen's Indian. The other main line to defend the c4 pawn instead of queen to c2 is the move knight bd2. After which, again, you'll see a common idea that repeats, not only in the queen c2 variation after white played e4, remember black played d5. In this situation, again, black can play for d5, and after something like captures, bishop g2, bishop d6, we start to see a common recurring theme in the terms of this bishop a6 development in the Queen's Indian, black trying to strike at the center with d5 in order to justify this development by creating pressure along the diagonal. Here, black wants to play the move rook e8, and potentially even pop a knight into e4. White, in many cases, will play the move knight to e5 here, which is a strong move, and after something like rook e8, you can even see tactics like knight to c4, exposing the pin along the diagonal. The game is very interesting and dynamic, and probably roughly equal, and again, you can check out and use Game Explorer searches and games databases you can access online to see more about that line. The other way to defend the pawn is the move b3, and again, we see a similar circumstance with white having to deal with black's strike against the c4 pawn. Again, if you see this capture here, you'll see a natural type of plan for black with getting castled and trying to use the e-file and potential pressure here on the open diagonal with the rook and bishop working together. And again, you see white at some point trying to use the squares in the center for his pieces, as well as exert pressure along this diagonal against black's exposed light squares on the queen side. So in review, I would say that the Queen's Indian is a main weapon. It's a main way for black to play against white's approach to decide to avoid the Nimzo. Keeping this idea of b6 in your mind and black's attempt to control the light squares, whether it be with the bishop a6 development and strikes with d5, or with the bishop to b7 development, an early assertion of the knight, and potentially f5 as I showed you. Keep the Queen's Indian in mind as a way to counteract white's choice to avoid the Nimzo Indian. Hope you enjoyed this, and there are lots more videos on this type of subject and games like this on our main site, and hope you're enjoying our YouTube channel. Hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll see you around on Chess.com.